Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Learning Kitchen Live. My name is Lindsay and I'm one of the dietetic interns here. Today we're going to be making vegan French lentil stew. The recipe you can find in the comment section if you want to follow along while I cook this. And it's going to be something that I hope is sure to warm your heart during these colder months. So the first thing I have here is that I have a pan of about 2 tablespoons of olive oil on a medium heat stove right now in about a larger stock pan. So I'm going to add some onions as the first step to this. And this is about 1 large onion, or if you find extremely large onions like I have, then it's about half an onion. And we're also going to add the garlic at this step as well, with a little bit of salt and pepper. Let's see how a little bit of salt and pepper I'm able to do. Okay. One of the things that's really great about this recipe is that you really can modify it to whatever taste preferences you have. So, here at Community Servings, we like to stick to more low-sodium foods, especially for all of the different types of diets that we serve. So I try to keep this a little bit more low-sodium as well in the salt that I add to it, just to make sure that, anyone who has other preferences, you can add it to your bowl when you serve yourself. So I'm going to let this cook for about 4 to 5 minutes. Keep track of it myself. And then we're going to add in the onion, or the celery and the carrot. This recipe is super easy to make, which is one of the reasons that I like to make it so often in the fall. So we typically make it in a pressure cooker at home. You can make it in a pot. If you have a crock pot, you can also make it in a crock pot. It's really kind of whatever's easiest for you in your life. So we have really nice aromatic smell going on right now because of the onions and the garlic. And then that olive oil will really help to caramelize the onions as well. We have a couple of key ingredients that we're going to be using today. So French lentils or black lentils are a lentil that I really prefer to use just because they have a very different texture from regular lentils or green or red lentils. So the black lentils really hold their texture a lot more than the green or the red lentils, which is why I like them, especially in soup. So you're not going to end up with like a curry type of soup where it's a bit on the thicker side because of the lentils. The lentils actually aren't going to add any thickness to the soup. They're just going to be there to add like a really nice texture. I also like to use black lentils in salads. I'm kind of weird and I really don't like the texture of beans, which is funny as a vegetarian. But I like to use them in salad again because they really hold their texture super well. And then the other thing that's going to be our key ingredient here is Swiss chard. I have rainbow Swiss chard, and I like to use rainbow Swiss chard just because of the color. You can use green Swiss chard, red Swiss chard, spinach, kale, whatever greens you like, collards. So I'm just waiting for my onions to get a little bit more cooked. So that way when the soup actually sits to cook up, that the onions will be cooked all the way through. More of that translucent, caramelized kind of color is what we're going for. So I decided to focus on folate or folic acid for this dish because folate and folic acid are typically something that's really hard for people to get, especially if you don't eat a lot of whole grains or veggies or fortified foods as well. So folate and folic acid are going to be used interchangeably during this presentation for all intents and purposes. They're similar. It's just a different form. So I will be referring to them as the same thing. And what's really important for folate or folic acid is that we meet our recommendations because it really helps our cells develop properly. It's especially important for pregnant or breastfeeding women to get enough folate or folic acid in because the folate helps the fetus develop. And without proper amount of folic acid, it actually puts people at risk for neural tube defects during pregnancy for the baby, the developing fetus. And then the other thing that we look for when we're eating folate is our red blood cells. So our red blood cells can't function properly if we don't have enough folate in the diet. So it can lead to things like anemia. And you may have experienced something like this if you're not getting enough folate or folic acid. You definitely want to check in with your doctor. Maybe you're feeling fatigued. You might notice pale skin or pale nails. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And one of the really important reasons that we as adults and people who are not pregnant or breastfeeding get enough folic and folic acid as well. So our onions are looking pretty good here. I'm going to go ahead and add in the celery and carrots. And if you are like me and hate celery, you can dice your celery as small or as large as you want. Smaller pieces cook faster, which means that I don't have to taste them in my soup. So they're nice and soft. And we're also going to add our spices at this time. So I have 1 teaspoon of cumin, 1.5 teaspoons of thyme, and then 1 teaspoon of turmeric. And not only are these going to add a lot of really great benefits, the turmeric is anti-inflammatory, but it's also going to add a ton of flavor to our stew as well. So really when you make this stew, you're kind of getting a nutrient powerhouse is how I look at it. And it's easy. Easy to get all of these nutrients in as well as cook it, which I think is really important, especially as we move into the colder months. People don't really want to cook so much. You're tired, the sun's going down earlier, so it feels like it's later in the evening. And you want to cook your carrots and celery until they're a little bit softened. They don't need to be softened all the way, especially if you have a pressure cooker or a crock pot. You can just throw that stuff in and kind of let it cook as it would cook. But since I'm not using a pressure cooker today or a crock pot, I'm going to make sure that they're at least a little bit soft. And I wish you guys could smell this right now because the smell of the thyme and the cumin is quite amazing. So some of the other things that I wanted to note here is that we're using 1 cup of lentils, and because we're using the lentils and the Swiss chard, we're really getting a lot of folate and folic acid in this recipe. So 1 cup of lentils is about, the soup makes about 4 servings. And so in 1/4 cup of this, 1/4 cup of lentils, you're going to receive about 90 micrograms of folate or folic acid. And for your reference, the ranges for kids are about 150 to 300 micrograms for toddlers, 300 to 400 micrograms for teens and adults. So 90 micrograms is quite a good amount for this, for the lentils in this soup. And then the Swiss chard, again, quarter, or if you take a quarter of the serving, so 1 serving, not quarter of the serving. If you take a quarter of the soup and 1 serving, you're going to get about 16 micrograms from that amount of Swiss chard. So this is about 3 cups of Swiss chard, or 1 bunch. I usually use 1 bunch. Okay, so now I'm ready to go ahead and add in my fire roasted tomatoes. And I really like using fire roasted tomatoes as opposed to regular diced tomatoes because these add so much flavor. And again, you don't have to add a ton of salt to your dish when you start using spices and adding a ton of flavor in other ways. So I'm going to go ahead and mix that in. I'm going to add in about 2 cups of vegetable broth. Or excuse me, 4 cups of vegetable broth. Don't do 2 cups. You will not have a soup then. I'm going to add in my lentils. The lentils are pretty much the thing that take the longest to cook. So, and like I said, the texture of these is meant to be more firm. So about 35 minutes on the stove would be adequate to cook these through all the way. But if you like yours a little bit firmer, or if you like your veggies a little bit firmer, you know, you can absolutely cook this as long as you would like to make it fit the flavors, the taste preferences of you and your family. And the last thing I'm going to do is add in the Swiss chard, but I'm actually not going to add it in right now because it takes up quite a lot of space and I want to have this cook for a bit. So I just wanted to show you guys again, you're going to have about 1 bunch of Swiss chard, which is about 3 cups, that you want to put in at the last stage of the cooking process. So if you're cooking for about 35 minutes, then you're going to add it. You can add it in the last 5 minutes if you want. You can add it once the soup is finished and put the lid on and just let it sit for a little bit. That works as well. I personally like to add mine in the beginning or when I finish this stage because I like my Swiss chard to be cooked all the way and wilted quite a bit, but that's a personal preference, so that's up to you. And then the last thing is how it looks at the end. So when you finish the vegan French lentil stew, it should look something like this. And again, you can modify this stew in any way that you want. So I really love to make a cashew cream sauce to go with this, and I'll usually add that in at the end. It adds a really nice creamy texture. It makes this soup a bright orange color because of the lightness from the cashew cream mixing with the color of the turmeric. I also like to add a splash of vinegar to my bowl because I think that really brightens up the soup and adds, again, even more depth of flavor. And then my favorite thing to do is to serve it with a piece of sourdough toast, a little bit of butter, and dip it in there. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Learning Kitchen Live. I really hope that you get a chance to enjoy this vegan French lentil stew during these colder months. And thank you again. You're done?